Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Thursday evening stream with the one and only Chris Shelton.
Hey.
How are you doing? Welcome back.
Yeah, impromptu live stream, folks. We were all set to do a recording today, and Alex was like, "Hey, you want to go live?" I'm like, "Yeah." Then he's
Why
like,
not?
"Hey, you want to stream it on your channel too?" Yeah. So here we are. Hey, everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. So for anyone watching on my channel, go and check out Chris Shelton. I'm sure most of my viewers will already be subscribed to you because you've been doing it way longer than I have. But in case there are a few people that aren't, there's a link in the description. Go and check out Chris's channel. It's awesome. And you can watch this stream from both of our channels at the same time if you wanted to get us the watch hours and that sort of stuff. But just a suggestion.
Just saying.
So yeah, as Chris mentioned, this is a live chat, so we've got the chat going here. Hey Colonel Brock, and hello some regulars, Free Xenu Project and From a Poet. Before we jump in, do we want to bring up the super chat that we got before we started? This is from your channel,
I want to thank Dr. Julian Bashir here. To be Jedi is to face the truth and choose. Makes sense to me. Thank you very much.
That's a good quote. That's a good quote. And actually, that's a nice way to start the stream. I actually have a quote that I thought we could begin on. Obviously, this stream, we're going to be talking all about Scientology's finance schemes, its money. And I thought, let's start with a quote from a UK government report. In 1975, there was an internal investigation in the government as to what Scientology is doing and so on. And this is a quote pulled from that internal report. And it was concluded, the Church of Scientology does not merely persuade people to part with their money, it is a harmful movement with an evil reputation. Yeah. The UK government said it in 1975.
And they nailed it. Just like
They're
they
not
did
wrong.
The Anderson report and so many other investigations and work that they did, trying desperately back in that time, as did the United States, to use existing laws to try to shut down a criminal operation. But it succeeded at making its apparent reality, the facade it put forward, it succeeded as a church, Scientology did, in getting past all that. And I think that's one of the reasons why we don't see as much attention being put on Scientology now as was done in the past. There were very serious efforts to really try to get it to stop its criminality, and they didn't pull it off.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're not tax exempt here in the UK. They were denied charity status in 1999 because it was determined that they weren't for the public benefit. So they set up in a bit of a dodgy tax loophole kind of way, which we'll discuss a bit later. And I wanted to start with just showing a quick screen share. So why are we talking about this? I recently launched a website called Scientology Business. Now, Jeffrey Augustine has the website ScientologyMoneyProject.com, and he was very encouraging of me to start something similar to look at the UK operations and finances of Scientology. So I just wanted to show this website. I'm putting articles up fairly regularly, looking at Scientology's UK operations, their finances, why tax exemption is so important, and so on. And this is kind of where this conversation began, because I started looking at the business operations here in the UK and saw that their accounts in Australia, which is where they operate through, their company is based in Australia that they operate through in the UK, are really detailed and give a really good picture of like the finances, what they spend their money on, and all of this. And it started my sort of deep dive into the money of Scientology, particularly here in the UK. And I thought, let's bring Chris on to talk about this, because you know a lot more than I do, having been doing this for so much longer. Do you want to give a bit of background maybe into the history of Scientology and its money scams, if you like, as a bit of an overview, because they've been doing this for a long time.
Yes, they have. They have been. And there are probably scams that have happened through the 1950s and 60s that I'm not even aware of, or, that have been lost to history. Because a lot of this is carried on through the memory of us ex-members. There's, and on message boards and, ARS and things like that. But there's history of Scientology. It's been around for a good long time. And during that time, there have been no shortage of schemes that they have engaged in different places, and often internationally, to extract money from people. And these schemes are always caught out, covered up. When Hubbard was around, he would then sometimes issue some policy or bulletin or something in writing after the fact, saying, this isn't what I intended you to do, and scapegoating somebody for it. Almost uniformly, somebody would be blamed. And then none of the money was ever given back, which was the really telling sign of whether they were really sorry about it or not. And then they would move on to come up with another scheme. And there's a thing about Scientologists that, especially the ones who get onto the money lines, we could say, they get very clever because there's an incredible amount of pressure put on the salespeople in Scientology, what they call regs. They don't call them salespeople, but that is what they are. And the pressure that is put on them is incessant, it is intense, and it is unrelenting. And it's just a vacuum cleaner for money. So, for example, in the 1970s, in the early 1970s, Scientology had a boom period, 1971, 72 time period, if I remember right. This was something Hubbard later bragged about in the birthday game. The entire birthday game concept actually originated out of this boom period. And a key part, probably the key part, of this financial boom period was a concept that was created, I believe, in Boston by Sea Org members who were sent there as punishment, if I have my story straight. Hubbard exiled them from the ship and said, go make Boston, go prove yourself, right? And off they went. And they came up with a concept called postulate checks. And this is back in the day when, you'd write checks. They didn't have, so many things we have now. And so checks were your number one way of passing money that wasn't cash. And postulate checks were created in what we could say, the madness of the end of the week. You've got to get the money in by Thursday at 2:00. That's your time. In Scientology organizations, they measure their statistics week to week to week, and Thursday at 2:00 is the cutoff point.
And can I just jump in there as well and just say, from personal experience, talking about that pressure on staff members and regging money, I know that all too well. I was the director of public book sales, so I was in a sales role. My job was to sell books, to make money, to get new people into Scientology. And what Chris mentioned about the pressure to make money is 100% true. Your stats, your performance as a staff member is recorded by your statistics, and the pressure to perform is insane, because if your statistic is not up each week, then you get in ethics trouble and you will face punishment and so on, depending on the severity of how sharp your decline in your graph has been. So the pressure to sell books in my role was insane. You have to sell more books than you did last week, every single week. And the week, as Chris said, finishes at 2:00 on a Thursday afternoon. Who knows why? I don't actually know why. I don't think anyone even knows why.
It actually has to do with banking and income.
Of course.
Getting that's where it originated from.
Right.
So deposited.
Yeah. So Thursday at 2:00, you have to get all your stats in, and that's when the week is cut off. So there's immense pressure on a Wednesday. If you'd sold 50 books by Wednesday, but last week you sold 55, you need to make sure you sell 6 books before 2:00 on a Thursday. So there's immense pressure in that last 24-hour period to make sure do everything you possibly can to get your stats up. And you mentioned postulate checks. So a postulate in Scientology is when it's kind of like an affirmation, right? You kind of say, I'm going to make this happen, or, telling yourself that, I believe I'm going to make $1 million, or I'm going to win the lottery, right? And a postulate is kind of having that positive affirmation. And in Scientology, the belief is if you postulate and you'll make it go right, it will happen, right? So what happened with the postulate checks?
Well, it's exactly along that line. What this was, okay, I need the money by Thursday at 2. I'm trying to sell you on an auditing package, and this package is going to be $10,000, which is not an outrageous amount of money, by the way, for a package of auditing. That's pretty typical. You don't have $10,000 right now, but you're getting paid on Friday, because most people get paid on Friday. And the money will be in the bank over the weekend, and you'll have the money on Monday. But I can't wait till Monday. I need it now. And here it is, Wednesday night. And I need that money. I want that $10,000. So I get you to write me a check, post date it to Monday, and give it to me now. And I deposit it, right? I take it as income, and I count it as income because I got that check in my hot little hands. And it's not a good piece of paper. This is a bad check. But I count it as income. I invoice it as income for this week. And I go and give it to the treasury people, and they go deposit it. And maybe it bounces and maybe it clears. It all depends on whether you make it go right to get that money in there before that check clears. Well, predictably enough, a whole lot of these checks bounced. They didn't clear. The money wasn't there in time. And as a result, there were bank charges and more bank charges and more problems and more flaps. And in fact, you do this enough and banks start getting really upset with you as an institution for giving them bad checks, because this can become a criminal activity. And so this blew up in their face. But this effort, this postulate check idea, was not just something that happened once or twice. This was a fad. This took over. This went all over Scientology network. And this became such a problem, and it blew up so badly that Hubbard ended up writing an issue, an executive director, one of those blue on white issues. And it was called Postulate Checks. You can look this up today. It's there in the archives, right, in the Scientology materials. And it's crystal clear, this was not okay. Whoever, this was absolutely not right, blah, 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 blah. But this was how they created, or a big part of how they created this big affluence, as they call it, this big, huge income spike internationally. And this was all, as I was told, this was all originated out of Boston. So that's an example of how you have this sort of flat line kind of creeping along. If you imagine a graph, and the numbers are kind of plotted week to week, and they're sort of going whoosh, straight up in vertical, baby. And this was a huge deal, right? Everybody was like out of their minds. Everybody was so happy. This was so amazing, until it wasn't, until suddenly all the consequences of their actions caught up with them. And then it was a total flap. People were scapegoated. This practice was canceled until something else came along, and something else and something else. And we see this all the way to now. And its most recent incarnation that we're aware of was the 5-year stint of the chase wave, which we can talk about. But there are things in between, right? There are always schemes happening to get money in. And as Hubbard himself said, make money, make more money, make more money, and pull it in. If you're not pulling it in with a high-powered vacuum, he said, then you're not doing Scientology right, administratively, like organizationally. So this is not just some rando or some bad apple. This is a repeating pattern of behavior with this organization, and it's one of the biggest clues we have right there you know, it's very obvious that this is an actual criminal operation that's disguised as a church. That's how I like to put it.
Absolutely. For those of you who are interested in what a Scientology stat graph looks like, this is actually this is my statistics. This is a graph that I still have in my documents from my time in Scientology. So my statistic was NBS Raw, number of books sold to Raw public. That's people who haven't done any Scientology servicing before. And this is my actual graph for about a year of my production. So you can see this is what an actual graph looks like that a Scientology staff member will be reporting on. And this is a real life example of the sort of statistics you would expect. You can see the big spike on this end here is when I achieved about 200 book sales, which was the largest boom in book sales London had seen. I've got a nice commendation here and so on. But that's the kind of reality of the graphs, and we'd have this graph every single week. You'd have to plot your statistics on there, so there's immense pressure. And I want to talk a little bit about the mindset of why this is important, because Scientologists don't think they're committing fraud, or they don't think they're doing anything wrong, because they genuinely think that this is the best way to save humanity. And by securing financial security for the church, that protects the future of Scientology, and, you know, what the wider world, the outside world, you know, consider fraud or financial crime is not important, because that's just what they call it. And Scientology is the most ethical, best thing to do. And if they call it a crime, who cares? Because it's not really a crime, because we're actually doing the greatest good for the greatest number of dynamics here, right? So I think a lot of Scientologists won't look at it as, hold on, I'm writing a check here that I know is going to bounce, and I'm handing it in, and they know it's going to bounce if I don't have the money in my account on Monday, and they're going to cash it knowing that I don't have the money in my account right now. I'm not a legal expert, but I'm pretty sure that's illegal. And all of them involved are thinking it's okay, because what matters is A, they're going to make the money appear somehow, and B, it's all about the statistics, right? They don't think, hold on, this might be illegal.
Oh, no, not at all. As long as, you know, illegal is what you don't get away with. So that's what's illegal in Scientology.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
And it's you know, this isn't a psychology talk, so we don't have to get too deep into this, but it really does speak to the weaponized empathy of Scientologists, because that is how it is. It's most of these people, you, me, so many people in Scientology are there to produce good things. They want good things. They're not there to con people or drive people into bankruptcy, or, you know, or ruin them. That's not what they're about as individuals, as people. They think that making it go right for Scientology is the best thing you can possibly do. And if we have to sort of skirt a few laws that we're clearly not going to break anyway, because you're going to make the check good, right? Then it's all good. It's all good. This is total ends justify the means thinking. And that's where that kind of thinking goes, as opposed to, say, the kind of personality who absolutely knows they're scamming you and they just don't care.
Yeah.
And that's not most Scientology staff members.
No, and let's not, you know, kid ourselves. I'm sure there are people in Scientology that do know exactly what they're doing, and there's always going to be those horrible people and those people that are fully aware it's a scam and so on. But like you say, the majority of Scientologists don't think of it in that way.
That's right.
And I think let's talk about the chase wave a little bit, because this is a prime example of how Scientology like to skirt the line of what is legal, what is not legal, what is right, what isn't right. And they will try and get away with as much as they possibly can and walk very closely to that line. And sometimes they slip up and do step over the line, but quite a lot of the time their activities are questionable, but they haven't actually broken any laws. For example, with the postulate checks, that the argument could be made that, well, no, look, we fully believed that when it came to the money coming out of the account, their money would be there. So we've not done anything illegal. That would possibly be their defense, because If they knew that there would be no money in the account and cash the check, that would be wrong. But because the person has promised that it would happen, then there's that defense there, and it becomes kind of that gray area of, that legal, is it not? Chase Wave, let's talk about what that was, when it was, what happened.
Yeah. If I could for just a second, let me just comment on what you just said, though, just because some thoughts occurred to me about what you just said that I thought might help contribute to understanding. Criminal conspiracy is when two people conspire openly to commit a crime. And in the case of the postulate checks, this was Scientology originating this behavior to the person, not the person saying, hey, I got an idea, right? And because of that, they really probably were crossing lines. But the beauty of that scheme was not one Scientology public was ever going to report it to the police or go and blow the whistle, because the way Scientologists think is you are responsible for your own condition. And if you didn't get the money in the bank, that ain't my problem. And most people don't understand the nuance of criminal conspiracy. So it really is quite interesting how it sometimes skirts and it sometimes crosses, but it crosses in, but the organizationally, the church itself, and as its own, as an entity, realizes it can get away with quite a bit of gray area and even pushing over into full-on criminality, because they can rest secure in the fact that they own these Scientologists and they're not going to go to the police. In fact, it's even a high crime within Scientology to do so. So there's I just wanted to throw that into the mix as well.
Yeah, 100%. The church is always right. The church is, omnipotent, and the church knows best, and ethics, when applied correctly, will save the planet. And the Scientology ethics system is a better way of running the world than the current justice system that we have. And Scientology, therefore, what I'm doing for Scientology is better and more important than whatever is considered in the real world as legal or not legal, because I'm saving people's eternity here. That's the mindset of a Scientologist, and that's why they will do these things. And like you said, it's a high crime to report another Scientologist to law enforcement. And why would you do that anyway? Because Scientology is going to help that person spiritually with whatever wrongdoing they've done, whereas law enforcement are just going to stick them in jail, and that's not going to help them actually rehabilitate from their crimes. That's the mindset of these people.
That's right. And gotta admit, that was my mindset for many years.
Mine too.
It's just a whole different moral foundation.
Absolutely. And that's why they started conspiring and were caught up in this chase wave scandal, right?
Let's get into that.
Let's get into what was the chase wave scandal. When did it happen?
This was a wild one. So somewhere around, I think it was 2013 or so. This went on for about 5 years, if I have my data right. It was originated, from the data that I have, out of Los Angeles organization. This was Sea Org members who came up with this idea, because LA org was and is the class 5 model ideal org, yet somehow Miscavige converted it over into a Sea org, which is fascinating. Anyway, there's all kinds of nonsense going on there. But the point is, Sea Org members ended up being posted in a Church of Scientology that would normally be at a level and be run by non-Sea Org members. And so they found themselves facing and confronting and dealing with problems that regular Sea Org members don't necessarily face or run into. And in this particular case, they had, again, income demand. Gotta make the money. And when a bunch of Sea Org members are injected into an area, the demand is 100 times what it is for staff members. It just is. The Sea Org has a very elitist attitude. They actually look down their noses at class 5 staff. They consider them not second-class citizens, but certainly not of the same esteem or value as Sea Org members. Sea Org members are the ultimate. They are the elite. And Hubbard talks about this and reinforces this thinking all the time. This creates a mindset, by the way. Again, not going to get too into psychology, but it creates a really narcissistic and very entitled attitude. And this is what leads to schemes like this, because what happened was they started playing around and learning about credit cards and how to get them, how to apply for them, how to get the application through, and not with insider knowledge or with insiders at the credit card company, but how do we tell the credit card companies what they want to hear in the best way possible so we get the maximum amount of credit that we can, including banging the credit card companies with multiple applications, multiple credit card companies all at the same time. You hit this one, and then before it clears, you hit this one, and before it clears, you hit this one. And a couple of very clever people figured out all the ins and outs of this in a very similar way to years before, how a very clever Sea Org member at ASHO in Los Angeles figured out all the ins and outs of R1 visas. Same kind of thing. Like, you just play and push against the rules and regulations, and you go and you find out, how does this system work? Now, how do I make it work for me?
How do we manipulate the system to our benefit, right? And
right.
with my understanding is that one of the ways this would work is a Scientologist would either apply themselves, or the church would do it on their behalf, for a credit card. Say, the amount of credit someone is eligible to get is tied to their income and a bunch of other factors. So say, for example, someone was allowed, $1,000 of credit. They would apply for a credit card for $1,000 or a loan or whatever. And before that was entered through on the system that all of the banks and credit agencies use, they would then also apply for $1,000 with another lending agency, and another, and as many as they possibly can. So this one person would end up with $10,000 of credit, even though they were only supposed to have $1,000. Am I right in the way that worked?
Yeah, that was one of the methods, and I don't sit here right now remembering like every single little avenue that was done, but what I do remember is they put it in writing. They actually documented how to do this. I have that somewhere. I should have pulled it up before we got into this, but it's a whole process, and they learned over time. It took them a few months to figure out, how do we play these credit card companies one against another through the application process online, so that we can get maximal return. And we're not talking $1,000 to $10,000. We're talking about $30,000 to $50,000 to $80,000 to $100,000 at a shot. And these were big money, and they were lying. They were telling fibs in their applications, and they were telling the credit card companies what they needed to hear. That's what they figured out, so that they could get maximal return on the credit cards. And then, of course, charge them right up. Make all the, buy a bunch of auditing, buy your bridge, buy a bunch of training, because the Church of Scientology's entire bridge to total freedom from bottom to top is $1 million deal. It's a lot of money to go all the way up. So it's not like that scheme is going to even get you your whole bridge. It's just going to get you what you need at LA Org.
They used to have, I believe they stopped this now. I think they started phasing it out while I was on staff, if I remember rightly, but they used to do packages of like the clear package. If you pay in a one lump sum, this will get you to clear, or the clear to OT package or whatever. And they'll give you a discount and go, okay, so normally this course might cost $1,000. This one might be $5,000. And if you pay for them as you go, it will cost you $200,000. But if you pay for this package, we'll give you a discount. It'll cost you $100,000 and we'll get you to clear, for example. So they were encouraging Scientologists to pay for in advance for their services because they get a discount. And things like auditing packages, this is still something they do today. If you pay for auditing by the hour, it's much more expensive than buying an intensive, which is a package of 12.5 hours of auditing. You get a discount. If you buy 4 intensives, then you get a bigger discount. So the more money you spend, the cheaper it gets for you. So you're encouraged to spend a lot of money and pay in advance. So couple that with this, suddenly everyone has access to loads of credit. It's a recipe for disaster almost, right?
Oh, absolutely. And that's exactly what happened. This overtook Scientology for 5 years. Internationally, this was exported all over, because here was the awful thing about the chase wave that was a little bit different from the postulate checks of the 70s, is that the postulate checks and some of these other schemes just spread through word of mouth or through issues in Scientology that might promote certain packages or deals or whatever. And those issues and those kind of things, were never promoting illegal activities. It was by word of mouth that they would spread this stuff. And the chase wave thing, I mentioned this started at Los Angeles organization, the Los Angeles church. Well, that's the model church. In other words, that's where the executives from all the other churches in the world were going to see what an ideal Church of Scientology looks and feels and sounds like. And this is how all these Sea Org members were supposed to be modeling how they were supposed to be acting back at their churches. So a lot of executives over that time period went through LA Org, and they learned all of this. They were carefully taught it. And for those who didn't go, they wrote it up and they sent it out by email. Here's what to do. And everybody was so excited by all this money coming in that they didn't stop to think about what they were actually doing. Or if they did stop to think about it, their moral foundations didn't give them any pause, because it's always the greatest good for the greatest number if it's for Scientology. And therefore, this credit card fraud ended up being exported around the world. And that ended up having consequences. Now, the consequences we know of for sure is that Chase, as an institution, actually shut down every single Scientologist who was paying. Anybody who would ever bang their credit card in a Church of Scientology for Scientology services found their Chase card no good anymore. That was one of the first things that happened that alerted the church. Wait a minute, what's going on? Just like years before, American Express had done something very similar back in the 90s. So this is nothing new, but this was just the latest incarnation. And as a result of this, right, because the Church of Scientology is not actually a major player in any way, in any sort of financial sense, they are a small operation compared to real operations, right? Real huge churches. Like, for example, the Mormons. The Mormons have 17 million members, and they're tithing every year. 10% of their income totals billions with a B. That's how much the Mormon church is making. Scientology ain't at that level. So the credit card companies were not particularly incensed enough to go, okay, we're going to go drag the Church of Scientology through court. But I understand contact was made and communications were had and Chase accounts were shut down. Again, just like American Express cards were shut down for Scientologists in the 90s. And that's kind of what stopped the Chase wave. And as a result, or in that process of doing that, Miscavige made a very big show of scapegoating every single salesperson who was involved in that process. And they were literally removed from their jobs and transferred elsewhere, and new salespeople were put on. So I imagine that happened in, I think, 2018. And then COVID hits like within a year or two. And it was, I imagine Scientology's been suffering a little bit financially for a little while now, but I don't know how things stand as of this moment, but I know they're not doing that chase wave stuff anymore.
I think it's interesting and certainly worth investigating more, because if you think about it, the Church of Scientology were engaging here in potential fraud, right? They were applying
Oh, yeah.
for credit on behalf of its parishioners that they shouldn't have got. They were lying about how much income they're receiving in order to get bigger credit allowances. There were even cases or instances of running up people's credit cards after they'd passed away so that they could use that money and have it in the church's accounts. Or older people who perhaps were towards the end of their life, well, you know, take out a bunch of credit because you don't have much longer left on this earth. And then when you pass away, that credit will be, you know, the credit card will be wiped off as part of the, you know, what happens when someone dies and they have a bunch of debt. And then the church doesn't have to pay that money back. They get to keep it because it's already been spent. So this is a potentially criminal fraud thing going on. And I don't know, to my knowledge, whether a criminal or federal investigation was done about this, because it sounds like what happened was David Miscavige found out that this was going on, or for some reason someone kind of pressured them or said, hey, we found out that you're doing this. And he went behind the scenes and had a meeting with some top executive at Chase Bank and said, basically, hey, look, I found out we were doing this. We shouldn't have. I've sacked everyone that's doing it, and it's not going to do you any favors PR wise if this gets out. It's not going to do us any favors. So why don't we just come to a gentleman's agreement that we don't allow Chase payments anymore? We stop doing it, and it all goes kind of hush hush quietly away. That's what it sounds like what has happened, and I haven't seen any evidence of a criminal investigation. Obviously, it's possible that there is one ongoing. We don't know about it because it's all behind the scenes and, you know, private and all of this. But surely Chase Wave, if Chase were aware of this going on, they would have some sort of legal obligation to report this to the authorities. Surely, I don't know. I'm not an expert, but
yeah, no, the choice to report is 100% up to them, and I don't know that they're obligated to do any such thing. Especially because, like I mentioned, it's such a small amount compared to the quite literally, you know, hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars that are circling through credit card institutions on a yearly, you know, decade-wide basis. You're talking about an incredible amount of money that cycles through the credit card industry, and almost unthinkable amount. Most people have no idea. And so this was such a small thing, they kind of went, okay, I'm glad you took care of it. Fine, let's move on. I mean, it was probably something along those lines, is what people who are more financially savvy than me have told me is probably what occurred. And that's why I passed that on. I can't say for sure. None of us can. What actually happened, we are only supposing here. We know for a fact, I have it in writing. I have the things they sent around. They definitely documented this. They definitely did it, and they definitely shut it down in 2018, 2019 time period. And within a year, COVID hit. And so between those two things, Scientology took quite a gut punch. But Chase, as an institution, I mean, it would have been, you know,
pocket money. Yeah,
it's pocket change for them. It's not a big deal for them. So if Miscavige comes to them and says, look, mea culpa, you know, us bad. Here's what we did. I fixed it. We're never going to have this happen again. And Chase goes, okay, well, we're going to cancel our cards because we're not going to be doing that with you guys anymore. Problem solved as far as they're concerned.
I think let's bring in some evidence here of the fact that this happened on a global scale. I mentioned earlier that the Church of Scientology in the UK operates through an Australian registered firm. In a nutshell, there's an organization called COSRECI, which stands for the Church of Scientology Religious Education College Incorporated. They were my employer when I worked for the church, and they're registered in Australia as a tax-exempt charity. The reason they do that is because it allows them to circumvent income tax, because there's a loophole in Australian tax law that means if your income is 100% foreign, you don't have to pay income tax on it. But because they're a charity in Australia, even though they operate only in the UK, they have to provide really detailed accounts and statistics and numbers about all the money that's coming in and all the money that's going out. And these are publicly available documents that you can view on the ACNC website. They're also on Scientologybusiness.com, I was telling you about earlier. And it's clear as day when you plot the numbers on a graph that this is something that was going on in the UK as well. Now, of course, Recce represents all of the UK operations. That's St. Hill, that's London, Birmingham, Manchester, all of the smaller orgs. So this is their total UK operation. And I did the legwork and I plotted it on a graph. So let me just bring these up because I think you'll find this fascinating.
Yes.
So they report.
If I might interject for just a moment.
Sure.
Major shout out to you. Okay. This is tremendously, you know, what do they say? Yeoman's work. You've done a gentleman's job here, sir. This is very good work. So
thank you.
Yeah, just putting that out there.
It's hard work, and every little rabbit hole I go down, I find something that's interesting and I go, wait, hold on, what's going here? And then I find something else and another thing, and it ends up is a huge project. And there are a couple of people in the community that are helping with some of this research and helping with various things that I'm working on. So firstly, shout out to those guys. Thank you. And if anyone else wants to get involved and help with this investigative work, you know, get in touch. I'm always happy to you know, I can't do this all on my own.
No,
but let's
not a one-man operation, guys. If you can give some time or help, contact Alex.
Exactly. Let's have a look at this. So this is the firstly their gross revenue. So they report their statistics in Australian dollars. So I did a bit of it. Let me bring you back here a sec. I did a conversion to US dollars. It's not exact, but I basically took the average conversion rate from Australian to US dollars in the year for each year. So roughly it's about right. The actual numbers might fluctuate, you know, by 0.5 or 1% or something, but it gives you an idea as to like the trend that's going on here. So this is their gross revenue in the UK, and you can see here 2013 to 2018 or 2017, there's this huge sharp increase in revenue. In fact, it more than doubles, right? Which is the same sort of time period as the chase wave. And then as soon as 2017, 2018 comes along, look, their gross revenue drops.
Right. And you can, and I'm glad you got the numbers on there too, because you can see what we're talking about, 35 million. Again, it's for you and me, this is an unthinkable amount of money. For Chase, it's a yawn. So it's definitely significant, and not to in any way downplay the criminal activity that's at play here, nor the lives that were actually ruined as a result of this. I'm just trying to offer that as a reason why Miscavige has not been dragged into court over this.
Exactly, 100%. Another statistic that I think is even more telling from their accounts is monies on account. So, you know, we talked earlier about people prepaying for services in advance. In their accounts, this is called contingent liability, and it's the total amount of money that is on account that Scientology admits people have paid for services that have not yet been delivered. This is that graph.
Right, there it is. There it is. We used to call this TAP as a statistic. We actually kept this kind of figure on a weekly basis, org by org, church by church. They keep track of how much money people have paid in undelivered services, and they call it total advance payments, or TAP. And it's an important statistic to measure whether they're viable, whether they are actually doing their jobs or not. And this chase wave just blew it out of, you know, just blew it beyond all measure, because as you can see, they took off. There it goes up, and then it just flatlines because they're not delivering those services, which is absolutely fascinating to me, because it tells me that they are packing in the money, but they're not actually delivering the goods.
Yeah. That's exactly it. There's obviously a huge drive here for people to pay for services, and then it stays at this sort of level because they're not delivering them, and they are continuing. Obviously, it's going up here, so they're still regging people for money for things in advance. But you would expect any normal business operation that goes on a recruitment or a money, you know, income drive. Yeah, let's get all the money in, and then this number should go down because they start delivering those services. This number should be zero. Now, the reason this number is important is because this is a liability. If you were to request a refund of your donations to Scientology, this is the amount of money that they have that they're liable for, that they could argue they have, you know, for if you pay for something in a shop and then they don't give it to you, then you can request a refund, right? You're liable for that money. That is their contingent liability.
And that's why you see, by the way, that it is such a gauntlet you have to run to get any money back from Scientology, because that money isn't sitting there liquid in accounts waiting to be given back if you request a refund. They spend that crap immediately. That's just on paper. That liability exists. It's a real thing, but it's a paper thing as far as where the money actually is. It's gone. And in order to pay you back, they have to make it again.
Yeah.
And that's why it takes months for people to get refunds of tens of thousands of dollars that they've put on account with churches of Scientology. And that's why also each individual church is a separate corporation with its own ledgers and its own liabilities. So if you get a refund from Scientology, you're actually having to go to each individual church and do the whole song and dance. And each individual church has to remake that money to give it back to you. And that's why they are such death on refunds in Scientology.
Yeah. Their contingent liability is something like 5 times their annual revenue, right? They owe, like, what, let me get this graph up again. What is it? So donations on account is hovering at just under $50 million. But if we look at their revenue for, this is a little bit out of date, 2020, I haven't plotted the most recent ones on there, but, you know, call it $15-18 million, right? Like, they're not, it would take them 5 years of putting 100% of their revenue into paying these people back. Like, if 100% of these people who had paid for services in advance requested a refund of their donations, it would bankrupt the Church of Scientology in the UK. They don't have enough money in their bank accounts. They have spent this money that has been provided for services in advance. Another thing, just to bring up an interesting graph, is their liabilities. So on top of this, the Church of Scientology in the UK actually borrows money. They don't earn enough money to pay their own bills, and they're propped up by Church of Scientology International and Celebrity Centre and Flag, who loan to the tune of $100 million to the UK church. And this number keeps going up and up and up. This is the graph here that shows the amount of money the UK church owes to its US counterparts. They are borrowing an increasing amount of money every single year. Their debt is going up, and currently the amount of debt the UK church is in is 5 times their annual revenue. Now, to put that into perspective, if you're a British citizen and you want to get a mortgage for a house, there's a legal cap. You're not allowed to borrow more than 4.5 times your annual income. Scientology's debts are 5 times their annual income.
Yeah, it's bad. And this actually is showing this cause recce liabilities graph here is going from the 50 to the 100 range in 6 years. That is, I mean, you have to start wondering if there isn't some, you know, other shady stuff going on here besides loaning money to Cause Recce to cover its bills. It's clearly, well, maybe not clearly, but suspiciously, I have all kinds of questions about whether there might be some kind of, I don't know. I don't think you do money laundering this way, but transferring $50 million over 6 years to an Australian account that runs the UK, I have many questions. Let's put it that way.
Oh, without a doubt. Hans Christian Schwartz here, they're going for 10x.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's bad, man. It's bad. But this is the kind of money Scientology's rolling around in. So I'm really glad you're putting some numbers to this, because it's very helpful to kind of get the perspective of what's going on here.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, you know, for your recognition. I'm trying my best, and I will continue doing so. And as I said, every little stone I turn over, there's another thing. I'm like, oh my God. Can we talk a little bit about the Scientology Credit Union? Because this is something I think that a lot of people don't know about. I certainly didn't know about it. And I was kind of shocked when he gave me this story. And I kind of want to tell this story because it's so relevant of this loaning money, moving money around between countries, and trying to secure funds in kind of questionable ways is not anything new. It's not something that's been going on since the 90s or since the 80s. It's been going on since day one. It's kind of fundamental to the way Scientology operate. What's the Scientology credit union, Chris?
All right. Yeah. Let me tell you my experience with this. So this is when I was a kid. I was growing up in Pasadena. My folks were staff at the Pasadena Church of Scientology, which at the time was a mission, and it was part of a mission network. Now, missions are the next level of organization down from the churches of Scientology. And a mission is owned by an individual Scientologist who's been given the right by legal contract to deliver or use the trademarks of Dynamics and Scientology as an individual, running his own little group out in wherever he sets up a building, and he gets to just go at it. And in the 70s, it was a lot more loosey-goosey than it is now. The mission network has basically been destroyed, and this was one of the catalysts for why. What happened in the 70s was the mission network got huge, and I mean really big, and especially in the United States and in California. There were a couple of networks of missions that were owned by what are called mission holders, the guys who actually paid the church for those rights. And these missions were being run as businesses. They were being run like by people who actually kind of had MBAs or had some experience with actual promotion and marketing and actually running an organization, not the L. Ron Hubbard fly by the seat of your pants, roll your own policy and just scapegoat everybody when you get in trouble. That wasn't how these guys were running the operations. And this is how San Diego, Santa Barbara, Pasadena, Orange County, San Jose, up in the northern areas, this is how they all started, is they started as these missions. And they became thriving, successful activities. This is how my parents got involved. I was a little kid running around in these places. And the central office of the Pasadena, the Southern California network, was run by a man named Carl Barney. And he's long since declared. And he was the guy who set up what was called Scientology Coordinated Services, SCS. And this was set up in Burbank, California, to kind of as the central hub to administrate and run his missions. And they issued their own policies, and they had hat packs and binders. And this is in the 70s. I mean, these guys were really trying to upscale the operation. The churches were pitiful. Let's put it that way. They were really bad off. My mom would talk about, her memories of being audited at the Los Angeles church way back in the day when there were cockroaches and when it smelled and when there was no air conditioning and, the auditors had BO and all of this. I mean, it was the difference between the orgs, which were supposed to be the higher class places, and the missions was night and day. And so people were flooding into the missions. They were selling books. They were doing all the things that create Scientologists. And the orgs were limping along. And of course, the big difference between the management of these operations was the Sea Org was running the orgs, and the actual people who knew what they were doing were running the missions. So they got a little egotistical, the guys running the missions. And they got so full of themselves and their own power that they set up a credit union. They actually set up a full little banking structure within their SCS operation to loan Scientologists money for their bridge services. And when you set up your own bank within a church, that gets a little weird legally.
Well, this is one question I had about this $100 million of debt, and I'm yet to get an answer from anybody. And we don't need to delve into this question now, it's a slight tangent, but
Sure.
The Church of Scientology International, FLAG and CC Int loan $100 million to the UK church, and the UK church pay it back with interest. So the tax-exempt US Scientology church is profiting off loaning money to the tune of $100 million to an international foreign entity. Now, Kosrecki, as far as I can tell, is a completely separate legal entity that isn't owned by the US church, is completely separate. So the question then is raised, when does it become a financial institution? If this tax-exempt organization in the US is profiting off loaning money to another company, you know, and that's a large amount of money. Is Scientology the first tax exempt bank? It's a question that I don't have the answer to, but you know, slight tangent. Sorry.
No, not a tangent at all, because you're actually on the exact same path. And that is the same kind of thinking that goes on behind the scenes with these guys as to how do we goose our income? How do we make this thing work better and better and better? And clearly, Celebrity Center and Scientology International, CSI, are corporate entities that consider themselves senior to and more important than the UK. UK and Scientology is a little pipsqueak operation. Nobody really cares about the UK.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in any kind of invalidative way of you or anything like that. I'm talking about their attitudes, not mine.
Yeah.
Right. When I was in the Sea Org and when we talked about, you know, Scientology internationally, the UK never came up. It was the West US and it was Europe. And sometimes we would end up talking about Italy because they are so incredibly
Italy was huge. Milano. Yeah.
So good at body routing over there, right? They're just amazing at it. But the West US and Europe are the big money makers of Scientology. That's where the whales are. That's where all the big money rolls. And money is the thing that determines importance in Scientology. So if that hasn't been clear yet. So even without knowing what the income things were as a Sea Org member, we all knew culturally we're the best. And so if we want some money out of the UK to help them along and we want some interest back, well, it's the least you guys can do, right? Like that would be the attitude within Scientology, which goes to this answer to your question a little bit, which is all of this, the thing that binds all of this together is this non-entity called the Sea Org. Mm-hmm. Because while all of these on paper are separate corporate institutions that look like they have their own boards of directors and look like they're separate, they're not. The people who actually administer the money and administer the finance and do these transfers are Sea Org members, or they are staff members being ordered around by Sea Org members. So if there's any invisible hand, I love doing air quotes during our talks here. If there's any invisible hand guiding this, right, it's the Sea Org, and that's Miscavige in charge of that. So that's the sort of hidden thing behind the picture that makes analysis of the situation different from an analysis of a corporate structure or corporate situation.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
X1011 said Europe part, any specific parts? Just for context, Scientology split up their organizational structure by continent, and continents in Scientology world is not the same as continent in the real world of geography. So they have Europe is one continent, the UK is another continent, you have West US, East US, Australia, so on. So when Chris is referring to Europe, he means what Scientology define as their European operations, all of their orgs and everything over there. That was a massive tangent. I'm sorry, Chris. Carry on about the credit union.
Yeah, no, okay, but it's along the same lines, right? And with so now the mission network thing was the mission network thing, and the crazy thing about this, and actually the very fortunate thing for all of us about this, is that L. Ron Hubbard actually was going crazy in the late 70s, early 80s.
Going crazy?
Yeah,
he went. He was.
Crazy.
Yeah.
And I, of course, that's a technical term. So what I mean by that is through the 70s, he had a stroke. He had some other medical issues. He started taking medications that affected his thinking, and he became incredibly paranoid, like incredibly paranoid, full on. I think it's diagnosable personally. And because of that paranoia, he saw enemies everywhere, including within the very people who were expanding his work. And the mission network was doing a better job of that than his own org structure. And I think he hated that. And I know the Sea Org did, because they were the ones running the orgs, and they thought the orgs were supposed to be better. And they had no idea what they were doing. And these guys did. And they hated them for it. And so there became these personality clashes actually became the senior thing to even making money. It was crazy because of Hubbard's insanity. And so David Miscavige was tasked with taking the missions out, bringing them to heel. And in doing so, David Miscavige, in classic Miscavige style, ended up scorched earth, just scorching the earth of where the missions were. And they turned them all into churches of Scientology, orgs rather than missions. That's how Santa Barbara, San Diego, Valley, Orange County, San Jose, maybe Sacramento, Los Gatos eventually, they all went from missions to orgs. The church just took them and took them over and kicked the mission holders out and declared them and took all the money in the process. But it was a short-term gain. They got a bunch of the money that was in the coffers, and that was it. And they destroyed their mainline successful operation for bringing people in. And in the process, they destroyed this credit union that had been set up that was operating at full steam, loaning people money and getting back payments with interest. And so they were making money on that too. And that was one of the reasons that they actually came down like a hammer on the missions, because strictly speaking, they had no business operating a credit union. That would have been putting them in all kinds of legal liability. But I'm not an expert on 1970s law concerning this, but I know for a fact you can't have a church loaning money to people. That's just not going to fly. And so that was one of the things that, that created the, okay, let's go scorch the earth and lay the salt, and may we never hear from these mission holders ever again, right? And Scientology never recovered from that. Not really.
And I could talk from personal experience.
I'm sorry, I'm going to just finish the thought. I'm totally sorry about that.
Go on.
It speaks to that weaponized empathy thing again, that like, how can we make this bigger? How can we make this go? And if we have to skirt a few laws in the process, well, don't ask, don't tell, right? So that's my finishing thought on that.
Yeah, I think I can talk from personal experience as well, because the way it's meant to run is missions are smaller little groups and so on, that report to the org, and then the org reports to the advanced org or management, and then so on. There's like a pyramid structure. So when I was director of public book sales at London org, we only had one mission that reported to us. There were several different missions in the UK, but they all reported directly to St. Hill, like Bournemouth and Poole, for example. It was a huge mission. It still is, but it was a huge mission back in the 90s and the noughties. But because it was closer to St. Hill, they reported directly to them. The only mission that I was responsible for was Malta, strangely. And the reason was because it was a British Scientologist moved over there, started a mission, and she was, reported to London for whatever. And for some reason, that was on one of my territories. But the mission was literally this lady's front room, living room, and they got together once a week, a couple of them, to go out book selling. And I had to call her up every week and say, hey, how many books have you sold? So I could report it to my stats. And it was never really more than about 2 or 3, because there were only 1 or 2 of them going out selling books. But this is the network that existed. And that's how the current state of play is. Missions are not a huge part of the Scientology network anymore. They do exist, but they're tiny. Also wanted to talk about the chase wave a bit, just bringing it back to that of a personal experience of how this stuff worked. When I was a Scientologist, which was during the beginning part of this chase wave scandal, I was regged by Flag. Flag called me up and said, hey, you should buy your basics, right? The basics, for those of you who don't know, is a package of books and lectures. It's basically this chronological study from start to finish of Scientology, scripture, and L. Ron Hubbard's books and lectures. And the whole package is a couple of $1,000s. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of books, a lot of lectures. And the Flag called me up. I was 17 years old, bear in mind. Hey, you should buy your basics. And I say, I don't have any money. I'm a teenager and I'm still at school. Okay, well, let's make it work. Let's make it go right. So what happened is the Flag person, the Flag rep, called me up and basically said, I have found a Scientologist public who has a bunch of money on her account, and she wants to help out, and she is more than willing to loan you the money so that you can buy your basics, and we can figure out a way of getting you a big discount. And overall, I managed to get my entire basics package for $1,500, which is like not anywhere near what that whole package should have cost. And also, it was the biggest expenditure I'd ever made as a 17-year-old. $1,500 is a lot of money. So basically, Flag organized a loan where I borrowed the money from this US Scientologist I'd never met, and the money was already on her account. So they transferred that money from her account to my account. Then I bought the basics with that money, and then I had to pay her back privately. I spoke to this Scientologist afterwards, and she said, look, Alex, you don't have to pay me back. It's fine. Like, I just want to help people get up the bridge, and I want to give people, I've got loads of money on my account, and I just want to help people. I personally think that's because she'd been a victim of the chase wave, and there was suddenly loads of money on her account, and Scientology aren't going to refund her. So she's like, cool, well, look, I'd rather you spend this money on getting your basics than it just sitting there forever not doing anything. But she said, look, we had to agree with what Flag was saying, because I couldn't say I'm going to give you this money, because in Scientology policy, you have to find the money yourself. You have to pay for it yourself. You have to want to make it, and you have to make it go right. You can't be gifted or donated anything. So yes, we told them that it was a loan, but in actual fact, don't worry about it. You can just have it. That is what happened in 2013. I think it was 2014. So that is the reality of my story of the chase wave and how it kind of unfolded internationally. Flag organized money transfers and loans between two Scientologists in different countries to figure out a way to benefit them and get the stats that they needed. That's how it happened. That's how it worked.
Oh, and and what you're talking about right now was so common that I'm almost like, I mean, because I get it, right? Because I'm like sitting here thinking to myself right now, like, this happens so often. Like, this was a routine weekly thing. It wasn't supposed to be. It's wildly off policy sometimes, but when you need that money, baby, you know, when the greens are needed. So arranging loans is what I'm talking about. This business of a registrar, a salesperson calling, you know, people with money and arranging to loan money to other Scientologists. This has probably been the most common practice among salespeople that's gotten them in trouble over the decades, because it's a practice that won't die. It's not, strictly speaking, illegal at all, but you would not believe the amount of trouble that it creates. A personal animosity, personal difficulties. People blow off the lines on this because of this, because people can't pay it back. And then some Scientologist who was guaranteed he was going to be paid back loans the money, who's not a wealthy donor, is not somebody who's got a lot of money. They've only got what they've got. And the reg calls him, you know, at 1 a.m. He's like, man, I got this guy and he'll totally pay you back next week. And I swear to God. So instead of doing the postulate checks, now they're doing the loan arranging, and they're screwing over their own members in the process. And really, most of the time, the salespeople walk away scot-free from this. They're the ones who actually instigate the whole thing. But then this entire conflict blows up over money that never would have happened if Scientology hadn't been pressuring both parties to do this loan.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And 100%. It's really funny too, because it's so, when you step back and think about it, what's so sad about this, I mean, in a way, if you, from a certain point of view, is it's not like these salespeople are personally benefiting from this in any real significant way. Maybe they get a $50 bonus or something. It's not like they're walking home with bank. It's the church, you know, and that's why I hearken back to that weaponized empath thing, because these are all people who think they're doing the greatest good for everybody concerned in the moment, and they couldn't be more wrong. They're creating so much conflict.
The benefit the individual salespeople are getting is knowing they're not going to be sent to the RPF and punished for their stats being down. They benefit by knowing that they're not going to end up in a forced labor camp similar to a North Korean prison camp called the RPF. That's the benefit, which isn't really a benefit at all.
No.
That should be the general. No one should live in a state of play where you think, oh my God, and you worry, am I going to end up in a slave labor camp tomorrow? People shouldn't live with that fear and worry every single day.
But I don't want to give everybody the impression that everybody in a sales position is operating in fear all the time, because it's not, strictly speaking, really true. I mean, yeah, that's a factor, but it was never a factor for you. You were never going to go to the RPF, but because you weren't a Sea Org member, you know. But it's there. The threat is always there. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to downplay it. I'm just trying to point out that, you know, I knew Regs who would ruin people for $10,000 so that they could get a spaghetti dinner that Saturday night. Like, that's the reward they get for doing all this chaotic insanity. So, and they looked forward to it. That was the best time of the week for, I mean, I was a Reg for about a year at AO, right? And this was the experience of it. I wasn't sitting in my chair terrified of going to the RPF every day, but I had been so conditioned, so beaten down into thinking these petty little rewards were like a Ferrari. You know, like that was such a reward for me to go out to dinner on a Saturday night. Oh, we lavished rewards on the Regs by getting them out to a nice dinner, you know? Everybody in the equation is being taken advantage of, is I guess the point I'm trying to make.
You know, the reward that I wanted, the reason that I was so good at my job and I wanted to sell as many books as possible, was because I genuinely believed that it was helping people. And this is what I wanted, right? A commendation. I wanted this piece of paper that says, this is to commend Alex for producing the highest book sales in over 2 years. You know, your work is vital to the expansion of Scientology. Recognition. I wanted this piece of paper that says, good job. You are making a great, huge difference in expanding Scientology and saving the planet. You are responsible for helping the world and saving the world from destruction. That's why I did it.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Because that's what we were conditioned to believe we were doing. And I wish, you know, it is the right word. I wish it wasn't. It sounds very gross, but it is. It's conditioned. We were conditioned. And it's really quite sad.
Masmir Dokagol, was it at least decent pasta?
Yes, it was. We actually did to a nice Italian restaurant up the street. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Should we tackle some questions, Chris?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so I've been starring them throughout. If anyone wants to leave some questions in the chat, do it now. We will prioritize super chats, of course. That helps support the channel. Also, before we jump into questions, I did just want to say, if you do want to support the channel in any way, super chats are great. I have a Buy Me a Coffee, so you can buy me a coffee in the link in the description down below. Chris, how do people support your channel if they want to financially help?
Okay, so I also set up a Buy Me a Coffee, although I don't drink coffee, so it's set up as a Buy Me a Slice. I just set that up. Love it. And of course, I have probably the best way would be to sign up through Patreon. And by the way, this is a commonly misunderstood thing. So you can sign up for as much as you want or as little as you want, $1, $2, whatever. You don't have to use the preset memberships on Patreon. You can sign up for whatever, but Patreon, PayPal, Venmo, all the links in my video description.
Fantastic. I'm just putting a link in the description there for your Patreon in the live chat. Sorry.
Awesome. Thank you.
I'll do the same for my coffee. Apostate Alex coffee here. There we go. If you want to support the channel, that's a great way of doing it. Let's go through some of these questions. Colonel Brock, LRH would have condemned the IES fundraising dollar without exchange.
Correct. He did, in fact, in writing. I don't think personally, and this is supposition on my part, this is unprovable, I think, at this point, unless somebody who was there knows. But the IAS was set up in 1984. Hubbard died in 1986. I don't think he actually knew about the IAS. because his policies were crystal clear that you do not do that. So that's my thinking.
Who knows?
Yeah.
There's another great one here, just relevant ex-Scientology. Does Buy Me a Coffee take a cut of the money? They do take a cut, but it's not nearly as much as Super Chats. YouTube take 30% of the money you earn from Super Chats. Buy Me a Coffee, there's Ko-fi, and then there's Buy Me a Coffee, 2 different providers. Their amounts are slightly different, but it's literally not much. If someone buys me a $5 coffee, I think I get like $4.80 or something. Like, it's a tiny, tiny cut. So thank you for that question. Denver Stevo, Alex looks 8 p.m. awake while Chris only looks 1 p.m. awake. True, it's true. I love that. Rune Skite Singh, imagine Scientology being a nation state religion.
Yeah, North Korea. That's what it looks like.
I actually asked ChatGPT once what a country would be like if it was run by Scientology and Scientology ethics were law, and it gave me a response that basically said just like North Korea, but worse.
Wow, that's hilarious. I wonder if it was pulling that from the stuff I talk about, because I think I'm the first person to have said that. Anyway, that's cool. That's funny.
Probably. I'll see if I can find the response. I screenshotted it. I'll share it with you.
Yeah.
Witness, they involved you in a technically criminal act or conspiracy.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is to do with the fundraising and everything, right? Yeah,
absolutely. That is true. That is what Scientology does. They are no matter what, every single thing that Scientology is promising is a lie. So that we can be super clear on right away. It is a fraudulent activity from beginning to end. And when I talk about why they do or don't get prosecuted or why this or that, I'm not in any way making excuses for or trying to apologize for or trying to lessen what Scientology is about. And I really hope that that is clear in how we talk about this stuff, because it is nothing but a criminal, fraudulent organization.
Yeah, without a doubt. And it makes people believe that by committing fraud, by committing crimes, by doing heinous things, you're helping people. By manipulating this person's emotions, by invading their privacy, I'm helping them. That's right. What it makes you believe when you're doing it. I don't think the majority of Scientologists are sat there thinking, twiddling their thumbs, oh, how can I extort these people for money? How can I ruin these people's lives and, cripple them with debt and make them live a horrible existence? No, obviously there might be some that are doing that, but the majority are sat there going, look, money's not a problem. It's not an issue. That's like a mess thing. That's like a physical world. Money doesn't mean anything. Get into as much debt as you want. Doesn't matter, because what matters is your spiritual freedom and you on an eternal scale, which is what Scientology is delivering, right?
That's right. Exactly. The people in Scientology who gravitate towards the Office of Special Affairs, who gravitate towards Miscavige's inner circle, are the people who would be more, I would say, tending toward true sociopathy and narcissism and that kind of personality type, who know what they're doing and are doing it on purpose because they get off on it. That's where they tend to gravitate in that world.
Yeah, for sure. Moody's Daydream, banks would go after any of us if we tried this scam, yet the damning cult gets off scot-free. Utter madness.
Totally. And it only speaks to the fact that it is very frustrating. And the fact of the matter is that prosecution is selective based on evidence, based on complaints, based on area of effect of the crimes. And so when it comes to prosecuting financial crimes, when you're operating at the level of trillion-dollar credit card companies, you select your targets because you can only have so many of them. It's not the reality I want to live in. It's the reality we do live in, though. And we have to kind of roll with that sometimes, as painful as it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Another one from Moody's Daydream question. Alex, have you checked your NI contributions? Have not been impacted by this chicanery. NI is national insurance. That's the UK social security, basically. And yes, I'm going to be doing a video about this soon, actually, because I was employed by Cosrecki. I have an employment record and I have a record of how much money I earned. in the tax year and how much tax I paid on that and the social security contributions that I made. So yeah, stand by for that one. That's coming soon. Colonel Brock request, Chris, give Benson a scratch for me.
Thank you, Colonel Brock. I will do so.
We love a bit of Benson.
Yes. Hashtag Benson the Magnificent.
Love it. He's such a cute dog. Liz D, $100 million is almost like 2 ideal orgs.
Yeah.
It's true. It's a lot of money that goes into those things. Right. Witness, a quick question. Are they loading an org to dissolve liability through BK? Is that possible in UK? I don't know what BK means, but I think what you're getting at here, because we were talking, when this came up, we were talking about the massive amount of debt that the UK churches amassed. I think this is what you're asking, and please correct me if you're asking a different question. But
bankruptcy, bankruptcy, right?
Yeah. So the Church of Scientology operate through this Australian entity here in the UK. When they applied for tax exemption in 1999, they did so through a different organization called the Church of Scientology England and Wales. They were denied tax exemption. But when they apply again, which I think is only a matter of time, they will do so with that organization. And if they win tax exemption, the Church of Scientology Religious Education College Incorporated, the Australian entity, there'd be no purpose for that anymore. So of course that would be dissolved. And I think I'm going to do a video about this, but I can see the prep work being done for COSRECI to be dissolved and therefore maybe bankrupt, or however they're going to do it, into all these different shell companies they set up. And the question that I'm asking is, what happens to that $100 million debt, and what happens to that money on account? Does it just vanish when COSRECI no longer exists because they're going to operate through a UK charity? It's a very good question.
Take a look at the history of the Church of Scientology of California in your research on that.
Yeah,
because that was an entity that they shut down. It was the equivalent of the current Church of Scientology International. It used to be Church of Scientology California. And when Wallersheim sued the church, he was suing Church of Scientology California. And they transferred money out somehow, or they got money out of there. They set it up so that there wasn't anything there for him to get. And somehow he overcame this chicanery, but they did try. There was something with shenanigans with CSC that you might want to check into, because if they did it once, they'll probably go about doing it again.
And the UK operation was highly involved in that whole chicanery. I recently uncovered a document that showed a large transfer of wealth from the Church of Scientology California to the UK organization that is still in operation today. So this is what I mean with this investigative work that's going on. There's so much. I'm trying to get through it all. It's mad. All right, let's get on with some more of these questions and we'll start to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Some Scientologists had an insurance company many years ago in the LA area. Is this linked to the credit union thing we're talking about?
Some Scientologists used to have what there again?
An insurance company many years ago in the LA area.
Oh no, it's totally different. I think you're referring to survival insurance, which was simply an independent insurance company run by a bunch of Scientologists, but it wasn't officially connected with the Church of Scientology as a legal entity. That was a separate for-profit company that got pretty big for a while and employed a lot of Scientologists. That's what immediately comes to mind in answering that.
Fair. And then a follow-up from Liz D. I wonder if they'd insure me against my body thetans messing with me.
No, you're just PTS, Liz. Come on. Just deal with it. You just got a couple SPs on your case. That's all.
Yeah. All right. Final few. X-Cyan, do you think that people with unused money on account at AOLA, etc., will ever get paid back through legal actions?
Nope. I don't think as a body, no. I think individuals can. But as a body, I don't see it, because exactly the point you made, right? They actually owe so much compared to what they have or could pay back. I mean, I suppose if Scientology dissolved all its assets, that kind of thing, we might see some pretty sizable repayments possible. But that would require legal action between here and there of magnitude, as I understand how these things go. So if you're asking, would Scientology do that kind of refunding on, on there? That's why I said it's so many hoops you have to jump through, because they don't want to do that and they resist doing that.
And also look at what they did to Jerry Armstrong, right? They were in court with him. They lost and were demanded to pay him a large amount of money, which they did. And then over the course of the following, 20 years, they clawed that money back in different lawsuits against him. And he had to pay it all back to effectively the same amount of money that they paid him. So even if they were ruled to give all this money back to people, they would find a way to get it back, and they play the long game.
Oh, that's for sure. Yeah, they'll never forget. That's something you can count on with Scientology.
Agro Siri in the back seat. Question: is there also an org in Pasadena?
Oh, this was answered. Yeah,
a mission.
Yeah, we answered this in the comments, because it went from a mission to an org. Yeah, it's an org now. All those ones I listed earlier used to be missions, and they turned into orgs.
Okay, fair enough. Colonel Brock has a question for you if you want to read this one out.
Oh, what do we have to wait for it to come up on my screen here? Just a moment, please. I can't read it. Alex is across the room for me, and then I've the live stream right here, which is on a little bit of a delay. Sorry, guys. It's just how they.
Do you want me to read it for you?
Ideal studio is set up here. Yes, please read it to me.
Colonel Brock, question. Chris, you and I are polar opposites politically. How do you explain our true friendship?
Well, I don't know, because it's an online friendship, but I will say that I am kind of open to being friends with anybody. I really have kind of gotten past the ideological divide on that. That wasn't something I used to be able to do, but I've realized in my dotage that using ideology as an excuse to vilify people is a rather silly endeavor. So I've kind of given that up. And so from my end, that's my answer. From your end, I am not sure, but I'm happy to be in touch.
I think also that brings it on to a really nice point to kind of round this off on, is what you do other than your YouTube stuff, right? And I think you've mentioned it on some of your live streams before, your consultancy work, and I wanted to just bring that up for a second, because I don't know if a lot of people are aware, but when I first started exploring my Scientology experience, I just needed to speak to someone who had been through a similar experience and could understand. I didn't need financial support, or, I was seeing a therapist already, but I just wanted to speak to a fellow former ex-Scientologist, and Chris is the person I reached out to. And Chris spent an hour with me on a Zoom call, having never met each other before. And I just said, hey, Chris, I've been watching some of your videos. Can I just ask you a bunch of questions? And Chris was like, yeah, sure. And we did that. And then a week or so later, I thought on it and I was like, okay, now I want to ask you some more questions. And he gave me another hour or an hour and a half of his time. And I asked really random questions of this happened, and then this happened. What policy were they applying there? Or what's your thoughts on this and this, and this doesn't make sense. And if you apply this policy and then you apply this policy, there's a contradiction, really specific Scientology questions. And then there were more general questions of this is pretty fucked up, isn't it? Chris gave me that time, and those two conversations were hugely helpful in my recovery and coming to terms with what happened to me and what I was involved in, and paved the way in me being open to talking about my experience publicly, and ultimately led to where I'm at now. So firstly, I wanted to give Chris some recognition for that, but I also want to shout from the rooftops that if you're trying to escape or leave Scientology and you need help, the Aftermath Foundation will help you leave and escape and get set up with a new life. But if you're not in that situation, you've been out for a little while and you just need to speak to someone, or perhaps you've got a friend or a family member that is affected by Scientology, and you could do with some one-to-one help on that. That's something Chris does, and something that I can highly vouch for as really beneficial. And Chris, I'll let you talk about that. But
thank you. Wow. I this was not pre-set up. So thank you very much for that shout out, Alex. I really appreciate it. I do consultation. I do it professionally, and that you're going to pay me for it, but I will help. I will listen. I will advise. I will educate. I will do whatever I can. I am not a therapist. I will not give you therapy. I am not a counselor in that sense, but I am a former Scientologist who is trained in coercive control, and I understand the psychology of it. And I'm more than happy to help. So that's the services the counseling, or rather I should say consulting service that I offer. So thank you very much, Alex, for bringing that up.
Marcus in Theta said, Chris is a kind soul. Conversations with each others that were involved in Scientology is crucial. And he said he did the same for me. I think that's such a good thing to end it on, is that we are here to help each other, and we are a community, and it doesn't matter what OSA throw at us. We are nice people that want to help each other and want to support each other. It's not this big bad nasty horrible SP world that they paint this picture of. Chris, if people want to support you or contact you or reach you or perhaps read your book, how do they do that?
Well, funny
you should tell I'm a marketing person.
I know, it's awesome. I love all this marketing help. Thank you, Alex. Yeah, this is my book. For those of you who don't know, I actually wrote one. It's a nice big book too. It's got a lot of good stuff in it. This is Scientology A to Xenu. It's a breakdown of Scientology. It is not my story. That's just chapter 1. The whole thing is really who was Hubbard, what is Scientology, how'd they get their tax exemption, et cetera, et cetera. It's all in there. So you can check that out. And otherwise, you can contact me through my blog, mncriticalthinking.com, or you can check out my YouTube channel, Chris Shelton MSc. And there are over 1,000 videos there for you guys, breaking down recovery, breaking down cults and how they work and the anatomy of it. And I've got interviews with psychologists, sociologists, and even neuroscientists on this stuff. I've gone deep. And all of it has been for my own recovery and to help all of you guys out there either understand it or help recover for yourself. So that's what's out there. And you can always contact me anytime at AskChrisShelton@gmail.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Chris. If anyone's watching on my channel, use the link in the description. Go give Chris a subscribe. Go watch his videos. If you want to support his channel, he has channel memberships, Patreon. If you want to support my channel, you can buy me a coffee. And look, we're always open. You can email Chris. You can email me, hello@apostatealex.com. We're always open to helping each other. And thank you so much for your questions. And thank you for joining me tonight, Chris. And Let's do this again soon.
Big time. And before you wrap up, let me tell my viewers, since we're simulcasting this, if y'all haven't subscribed to Alex's channel, you need to do so, because he's got great content. And if you can, reach out to him and give him some of your time, because what he's doing is good work.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Chris. All right, guys, have a good night. We'll speak to you soon.
Bye-bye, guys.